Today we have Jonny Rego in the studio with us.
That has become one of my favorite methods. It has side scan, which is very valuable in the springtime in the bay because it's just a lot of water.
And if you didn't know they were there, you would never be able to catch them. Once you were on top of them, though, they would hit soft plastics, flutter spoons, pretty much anything you drop down on them. And so down current side, anchor pulls tight, and it just flipped the kayak like with such force.
It looked like completely upended.
Welcome to another episode of the On the Water podcast. Beautiful.
Let's go!
This episode of the On the Water podcast is sponsored by our friends at Old Town Canoe and Kayak. I love kayak fishing, and to be honest, there's no place in the world that I would rather be than fishing on my Old Town Big Water pedal kayak. The Old Town Sportsman lineup includes paddle, pedal, and power-driven kayaks in a range of sizes and setups, including Old Town's newest kayak, the ePDL Plus. This is the fishing kayak version of an e-bike. It looks like the regular PDL drive, but it has a lithium battery assist that lets you pedal faster and with less effort. You could choose the level of assistance, or you can even let the battery do all the work and go into cruise control. What I love about fishing from the ePDL Plus is that it greatly expands your options, so you can go further, you can get there faster, and you can explore new waters. As a striper fisherman, it's allowed me to fish outflows in areas with heavy current, the places where stripers feed, and places that I wouldn't have the leg power to fish in a traditional kayak. Old Town kayaks are still manufactured, rigged, and tank tested at the Old Town factory in Maine. Check them out, and I think you'll find that the quality of a Maine-built Old Town kayak can't be beat. Hello and welcome to the On the Water podcast. I'm Kevin Blinkoff.
I'm Jimmy Fee.
And today we have Jonny Rego in the studio with us. Jonny is a Rhode Island-based kayak angler, an Old Town kayak fishing pro. You do a lot more than just kayak fishing, though. And Jonny's here today to talk to us about what a season is like fishing in Rhode Island. Welcome, Jonny.
Thanks for having me, guys.
How was your fishing season this past year?
It was pretty solid, honestly. The spring started off a little slow. That was my one complaint. Being on a kayak, you're obviously limited to how far you can go. Had a hard time finding the full-size bunker schools this year, which is what I really like to do in the early springtime in the bays. And then we found some really picky bluefish. Kevin, you can attest to this.
Mm-hmm.
You came down and fished with me in the spring, and we had bluefish that would not hit anything for hours. And really weird phenomenons like that in the spring, but I mean, eventually we got them to chew. But once that kind of slow period passed in the springtime, once summer rolled around, the striper bite got really good, and from there it's a pretty solid season.
That lack of bunker in the spring was coast-wide, pretty much. Down to the guys in the Raritan Bay were complaining about it. I know Narragansett Bay was tough. And I heard people say it was because of all the rain that we had in March. We had such a rainy March that it would have, kind of dirtied the water, kept the bunker further offshore. They did eventually move in.
Yeah, it was bizarre. It was to the point where, I like to chunk bunker at night in the springtime for stripers, and bait shops, normally stocked with bunker. They're like, we don't have it. The guys that would go and catch them and sell them to the bait shops, they couldn't find it, and that was their full-time job that part of the year, was finding bunker, and they couldn't find it. So that made me feel a little better. Eventually they moved in, but yeah, I have no idea what that was about.
I know one of the big bunker, they would cast net the bunker commercially in Rhode Island. We're looking to the Cape, looking for them up here.
Yeah, so I heard they were just traveling to try and find them. So
which is because Narragansett Bay is like a bunker factory most springs.
Exactly. So it was a little bit of a concerning sign. Opens your eyes to how important that bait source is. So hopefully this spring that doesn't happen and they're just all over the place. But yeah, that was my one complaint about the season, was a slow spring, but it picked up.
So how do you get your fishing started? What's the first thing you fish for in the spring?
I'm usually going for tautog first. It opens in Rhode Island April 1st, but the water is still really cold at that point. It's usually 47, 48 degrees, and I've never caught a tautog on April 1st. It just seems like they're not chewing when the water's that cold, or I just don't have the patience for it. It's usually April 6th to April 10th, I'll catch my first tautog. Kind of get all right, I got my first saltwater fish under my belt. Usually on the kayak, it's just easier to find structure. And then the first schoolies I'll usually catch kind of around that time too. I think April 8th is the earliest I've ever caught a migratory lice-covered schoolie. So it's usually the first week of April I'm hitting it hard, and usually get skunked a few times.
On those first tog trips, are you going right out of the gate with crabs, or you just start with a softer bait?
I actually learned a lesson a few years ago. I had to start with green crabs, and Dustin Stevens, actually, you guys know Dustin, he was using Asian crabs and was having better luck. And a lot of people agree that in that early spring, that they're just, when they're not chewing super well, and people even say their mouths are softer, they want a softer bait. So it seems like Asian crabs work a little better, and even sandworms I'll throw on.
That was always like prevailing old salt wisdom, was like in the springtime, tog have soft lips and they don't want to eat the crabs. I don't know if that's it.
It kind of sounds like a fishtail a little bit, but I mean, I've noticed that Asian crabs seem to work better than green crabs early on. But once, late April, May rolls around and they're chewing really good, it's just back to green crabs.
And what's your strategy tog fishing from a kayak? Are you anchoring up over structure, or are you pedaling to stay in place?
It depends. So I do have the autopilot, which has spot lock on it. So that's obviously a huge help for tog fishing. But I use that if I'm going deeper out and want to hover over structure, I'll use the autopilot. But honestly, in the springtime, I like sticking to the bridges and the bays because the water's a little warmer. And for that, I can use the autopilot, but sometimes it's like a little easier just to use my pedal kayak and just hug the pilings. And I'll even scrape like barnacles off the pilings, kind of chum it up, and then just drop it as close to the bridge as I can. And usually, it might take a little bit early April, but you can get them to chew.
That's a sheep's head tactic.
Yeah, I actually saw a video on that of people doing that down south. I'm like, it makes sense. So I'll scrape some barnacles off.
Yeah, you've got so many options in Narragansett Bay, being such a huge estuary. I learned it's actually the largest estuary in New England. So you've got so many options in different types of areas and places to fish, including bridge-type structure. So when you're tog fishing, you mentioned fishing the bridges. What other areas of Narragansett Bay are you focusing on to find that tog structure?
There's also a lot of oyster beds, too, that are good in that area. Bridges are honestly usually my go-to just because of the ease of access, and there are a lot of fish there. I have noticed it does get fished out after some time. So when it starts to get fished out, I will kind of move on and just try and find... Honestly, I'll just look at Navionics and try and find little hidden treasures like either a wreck or even oyster beds. That is the thing with the bay. There is a lot of water to cover, and sometimes from a kayak, you don't have the speed to go quite as far as you want to. So a little trial and error looking at maps.
Yeah, overall good access to Narragansett Bay for kayak fishermen, a lot of places to launch from.
Yeah, pretty good, honestly. And it's improved over the years, which is good. There's boat ramps, and then the beauty of a kayak is you can just pull up to a beach, throw some wheels on, and just launch it. So there's a lot of good spots.
And without specific spots, when you start your spring striper hunt, what type of areas are you looking for in Narragansett Bay?
In the bay, I'll actually start on the ocean front when they're first coming in. I'll just go to like one of the most southern points of Rhode Island, and it's pretty brutal out there in April, weather-wise. I've fished in the snow before, chasing after them. But I'll actually start oceanfront to get my first schoolies because they're just hitting that southern point of Rhode Island. And then as they start to filter in the bay, that's usually like a week or two after, I'll start going more in the bay for stripers. But actually, my hunt for them starts on the ocean front and not the bay.
Nice.
Yeah.
And then at what point do you start to see some bigger striped bass moving in?
Usually not until the first week or two of May. The moon cycles in mid-May, like the new moon and the full moon, are typically where I've noticed you get those big push of bigger bass going into the bays. And obviously bunker schools you want to keep an eye out for too. But yeah, April is not my favorite month. It's usually the first week I get skunked a lot, catching a few tog here and there. It's still freezing cold, a couple schoolie stripers. But once like mid-May or the first week of May rolls around, that's typically when it's like bigger bass around, tog are chewing really good. I kind of consider that like the real start of the season. So yeah, about mid-May.
And I think that's when we got out this past year and did some blue fishing, right? I think that was in mid-May.
I think so, yep. It might have been closer to the end of May, and that's when you'll see the blues really stack up in the bay too. And we saw them. They were so thick in the bay, we could see their tails sticking out of the water, and we were spooking them with our kayak. We were basically sight casting for them. And for whatever reason, they just didn't want to eat for the first 2 hours. And it was kind of bizarre, but kind of goes to show you, even bluefish can get lure shy sometimes.
Yeah, we had one of the most, absolutely windless mornings. It was flat, calm, beautiful morning. And as we started heading out, just big, you could tell they were big bluefish too, because you'd kind of see like a little dimple on the surface as you got close. And then all of a sudden this big whoosh as the bluefish just spook and take off. And I remember the First 30 seconds of that, spooking those fish, just thinking like, this is going to be the greatest blue fishing we've ever gotten on film. This is going to be incredible. And then it was like an hour later, I think we'd finally managed one.
Oh, I was stressing it because I've had so many days there where it is lights out and you could throw anything at them, and you got 4 bluefish fighting over your plug. And, you know, you guys came down from Falmouth to film, and I was about an hour and a half in. We had 1 bluefish under our belt. I was a little stressed. I'm like, oh, man, they might not eat. But I think what happened with us is the wind actually turned on, kicked up a little bit, and we had like a 40-minute window where we actually were getting them to blow up on our plugs and chase them to the kayak. But that took like almost 2 hours plus for that to start happening. So it's bizarre. You just never really know.
And is that pretty consistent year to year that you see bluefish move into that type of area? And if you could describe the kind of the area we were fishing in.
Yeah, we were basically fishing in sandy flats, and I think it's the bait that really brings them in there, and also the warmer water. They're in there every May like clockwork. And same with the stripers. And like I said, 90% of the time, it's usually lights out. It's some of my favorite spring fishing because it's easy. You're in the bay, you're sheltered, and the fishing's really good. But yeah, for whatever reason that day, they didn't want to cooperate. Maybe it was that lack of bunker because I really wasn't seeing bunker schools in there this year. But they'll be in there like clockwork.
It was interesting to see. We had this a pretty big area, a lot of fish around, obviously, and not a lot of other anglers around us. There was a fleet of kayak fishermen there, but they all seem to be doing something else.
Yeah, you'll mainly see kayak fishermen in that part of the bay. I've noticed a lot of the boaters are going further into the bay, trying to find like the larger biomass of stripers and bunker, and you know they have the motor to be able to do that. That's definitely more of like a kayak haven, and there's actually marinas very close to the spot. So you can even kayak into the marinas and fish in there, which is cool. But yeah, everyone kind of has their own agenda out in the bays. We've had good weak fish runs the past couple of years, so a lot of guys are going
That's
for
what
weekies.
It seemed like. There was a pile of kayak fishermen all in one area, and it seemed like they were all talking about trying to get weak fish.
Yeah, that was so bizarre. That started maybe 4 years ago. I feel like prior to 4 years ago, if you caught a weak fish, that was breaking the internet somewhere. It's kind of like a unicorn fish. And then for whatever reason, like 4 years ago it started, everybody was catching weak fish, and big ones too, like up to 28 inches. So it was cool to see that fish making a comeback. But that's definitely on a lot of people's minds in the spring in the bay, it's weekies.
I was looking through some of the old On the Water magazines the other day. I was just happened to be down there looking at some of the early 2000s issues, and there was an article, I think in 2001 or 2002, about weak fish comeback then.
Yep.
And then it tapered off for years. Felt like maybe 15 years in between that you weren't seeing too much about it. But now we're definitely in another upswing for the weak fish.
Yeah, it is. It is a fish species that people. We haven't really figured out what's going on there. But yeah, they seem to have booms and spikes, and we keep thinking, okay, now this is it. We're going to have 5 to 10 years of. They'll keep coming back and getting bigger, and it hasn't necessarily happened. But we are seeing more pockets of good fishing for weak fish up and down the coast. So hopefully it does continue to improve. Now, you also, around that time, I remember you posting online, you started getting into some really good bass in Narragansett Bay from the kayak, and it looked like you were doing a lot of flutter spoon fishing.
Yeah, that has become one of my favorite methods, and I feel like that was another thing that just recently came into popularity. I forget what the post was. Maybe even you guys posted it, but there was a video of a charter captain doing really well with flutter spoons. I think it came out like 4 years ago or something. And after that, bait shops couldn't keep flutter spoons in stock for a while. It was like the new craze. But basically, a flutter spoon is just a big metal spoon, and I enjoy kayaking out, using my fish finder, finding piles of fish, and just vertical jigging the flutter spoon right on them. And it is a really fun way to catch striped bass. You hook a 40-inch striper in 40 feet of water, jigging them with a spoon, like hang on tight because that thing's not coming up easy. That's mainly a spring thing for me because it's imitating the full-size bunker. I've had days in like the dog days of summer where I'm marking them, and I tried it, and they're just not going for it. But it seems like in the springtime when they're keyed in on bunker and you drop a spoon on them and jig it, I've had some very good days doing that. And it's a lot of fun too.
Shimano has rods and reels for every fishery in the Northeast, whether it's deep dropping the swordfish in the canyons, casting the stripers in the surf, or finessing panfish through the ice. That's about as wide a range of fishing applications as you're going to get. For inshore saltwater applications, the workhorse of the Shimano lineup is the Spheros SW combo. The Spheros SW is built with premium Shimano technologies like Infinity Drive, which increases cranking power and smoothness while fighting fish. The rods range from a 7-foot medium heavy to a 9-foot heavy and fit Spheros SW sizes from 5,000 to 8,000 for a range of lure and bait fishing. From the surf this past season, I used the Ultegra XR 14,000 XSD paired with the Shimano Tierlejo XX surf rod. The Ultegra XR is Shimano's most feature-packed surf reel to date, with the rigid cast spool support to stabilize the spool while casting heavy lures, Infinity Drive to increase winding power under pressure, and X-Protect technology to provide high-level water resistance. The Tierlejo XX is built for casting distance and durability. The 10'6", 1 to 3 ounce model was perfect for punching avid jigs through the wind during a sand eel bite in New Jersey last fall, and it was great for throwing pencil poppers to distant bluefish off the south side of Cape Cod. It's become my go-to combo when casting distance makes the difference in the surf. No matter what you're fishing for in the Northeast, Shimano has a rod and reel for it. To pick out your next setup, visit fish.shimano.com.
And what's your fish finder setup to find those fish?
I have the Humminbird Helix 7, so that's a good fish finder. Has side scan, which is very valuable in the springtime in the bay because it's just a lot of water. And I feel like in the bay, those fish are just moving all over the place, kind of chasing the biomass of bait. I mean, some are definitely staging up in certain areas, but there's days where you have to pedal a lot to find the fish, and that's when side scan opens up more of a view for you.
Yeah, we did some boat fishing in Narragansett Bay this year. You and I both did, and I had two very different trips within a week of each other. One of them, we went out in the morning, and there were fish all over the surface, and it was just chasing down striper on the surface, and it was awesome. It was great, throwing flies, and there were a ton of fish feeding. Another trip out, we went, and it looked like there was zero activity. And if you didn't have electronics, you would have no idea if there were fish around. But moving around, you'd eventually find them in the side scan, and there were piles and piles of fish down 30, 40 feet, pretty close to the bottom. Again, the water was still cold. And if you didn't know they were there, you would never be able to catch them. Once you were on top of them, though, they would hit soft plastics, flutter spoons, pretty much anything you drop down on them.
Yeah, that's the beauty of that side scan because, like you said, I feel like especially this spring, there's a bit of feast or famine in the bay where there's days where, like you said, there's just fish everywhere. They're easy to find. And there's other days where if you didn't have the fish finder, you'd be like, where did they go? So just having that as an extra tool as a kayak fisherman is very valuable. Saves a lot of skunkings for sure.
Yeah, I was out there the day before your day with the flutter spoons, the one where you said there was no indication of them being there. And I didn't know if that was, they were on herring. They were on herring and squid mainly. And we didn't find any bunker, but everything seemed to be glued right to the bottom. I mean, there were stacks of bass 10, 20 feet off the bottom, like thick off the bottom, but none of them were feeding on the surface.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and last year was I think 2 years ago, I don't think I made it out on Narragansett Bay once. I got out there 3 times last spring, and it always blows me away how much life there is there, how much water there is, how many options. One day I'm fishing one of the 3 passages down toward the southern end of Narragansett Bay where you're opening up into the ocean, and it's deeper water, it's colder water coming in from the ocean. And then another day I'm with you, we're further up in the bay on a sand flat, warmer, calmer waters. It's so cool. And then you've got the freshwater rivers all coming in. There's the Providence River. Yep. Thank you. The Pawtucket, the Sakonnet. That's the one I was trying to think of. So you've got all these rivers coming in, bringing in a ton of fresh water, bringing in water, different temperatures. You've got so much bait. It's a really cool fishery, and it's a really cool fishery to be able to access from a kayak.
I agree. Yeah, there's just so much going on, especially in May and June. Like, these fish are moving up and down the bay. They're coming from the ocean into the bay to the warmer waters. Then the bay gets too warm. They start vacating the bay into the ocean. There's just so many different avenues you can approach fishing the bay. It's right in my backyard too, so I feel very lucky.
And you've been fishing it since you were a kid.
Yeah, mainly not. I only got into kayak fishing about 5-6 years ago, so I grew up shore fishing. But I would be fishing off of Stonebridge, which is Sakonnet River in the springtime for tog, stripers, all that stuff. Mount Hope Bay, all those spots. Yeah, so I've been fishing it for a long time.
Do you still do some shore-based fishing, surf fishing?
I do, yeah. I'm kind of like 50-50 with kayak and shore fishing. I try and split it evenly. There's some years I kayak more than I shore fish and vice versa. That's kind of depending on the bite or, conditions play a big part with kayaking too. But typically, if it's a safe kayakable day and it's in a good part of the year, I'll usually be out in the kayak. It really opened my eyes to how much more water you can cover and how many different ways you can fish for stripers from a kayak versus from the shore. So, yeah, I fell in love with kayak fishing pretty quickly.
And for anyone who wants to get into kayak fishing, who is interested in it, what would be your recommendations, especially as it pertains to the Narragansett Bay fishery? What should they be looking for in terms of places to launch or fish, or is there a community that they can get involved in?
Honestly, the internet is a great resource. I usually just look up boat launches for a good rule of thumb, and you can find shore access pretty easily. And as long as you can park there and you have pretty close access to the water, the beauty of kayaks is there's so many transportation systems, like you can just throw wheels on them and just wheel it right down. So honestly, just like a little scouting of the shorelines, figure out what is public, what is not. That's a big issue. It's a growing issue, I think, everywhere, making shoreline access a little more private. But yeah, just scouting the shoreline and finding areas you can launch, and just a lot of trial and error. Just try new spots and see how it works.
And you've got a pretty good community too. When we were out fishing, you had the radio on. You've got a network of folks that you're talking to, mostly in kayaks, sharing information. How'd you kind of break into that community, or how'd you meet all those people?
Yeah, so that was that's another cool part about kayak fishing. It's definitely a little niche, or not as much anymore. I feel like it's very popular now, but a few years ago it was a little more niche. And honestly, just from launching at these public launches, you'll inevitably bump into other kayak fishermen. Everyone's has the same goal, fishing, having fun, and everyone has marine radio, so that quickly turned into like a good community. Like, yeah, the day you were out, we'll be like, hey, they over there, how's the bite? So yeah, this pretty solid community of kayak fishing.
Kayak fishermen are definitely like, there's more of a we're all in this together vibe, whereas surf fishermen is
it's the
kind of
polar opposite.
If you're at a launch, you see another kayak guy launch. Oh, what are you doing? You looking for albies today? I saw them here yesterday. There's a lot of information exchange happening. You see another surf guy at your spot, and like maybe you'll get the head nod, but often not.
I completely agree. Yeah, shore fishing is more like, how's the bite? It's like, no fish here, man. Terrible. Kayaking, it's definitely more of a
I've never heard Jimmy answer that question truthfully when surf casting.
Yep.
I've never heard you answer it. I've seen you just walk away.
Yeah, you pretend. Half the time I actually can't hear, but just pretend you can't hear.
Yeah, and part of that is like kayak is a mini boat. I mean, obviously you can't go as far or as fast, but you can just cover so much more water and just find, like, I've learned so much just by kayaking. You just find so many new spots. So it's definitely, I recommend if you've been shore fishing for a long time and you've been dabbling and maybe wanting to kayak fish, it's definitely worth looking into.
Now, we were talking before about that flutter spoon bite in the spring, and then you said that when it got a little warmer and you got towards summer, you'd mark fish, but they were much more reluctant to hit the flutter spoon. How do your tactics change for striper fishing as the water gets warmer?
Yeah, so they usually, as the water gets warmer, they're typically found deeper and they'll go out into the ocean. One way to almost always get them to hit is the tube and worm. I don't know why, but it's almost like a cheat code for stripers. There's been days where we're marking fish and we'll drop a live eel on them. They're not touching it. We go over the same school of fish, slow trolling a tube. We're getting hooked up every time. It's almost to the point where it's like a grid pattern. Like, okay, you're going to get tight in 20 seconds. I don't know what it is about that hunk of plastic, but 90% of the time they will hit it.
Any theories, either of you, on why?
I don't know why. I can't figure it out. I've heard that from so many people who fish tube and worm. I've seen it myself. For whatever reason, it's like they just, and it's the weirdest bait. For anyone who's not familiar with it, I mean, it's basically a surgical tube, long, anywhere from a foot to even, I've seen they make them up to
30
like
inches.
30 inches or even bigger. And
maybe about a half inch to an inch in diameter.
Often it's wired down the center of the tube in the rig, so it can be shaped. Some people fish it with a kink in it or a spiral so that it spins. So it goes through the water for the most part, like looks like a long worm, just kind of spinning and tumbling. And then there's a single hook at the back end, and people tip that single hook with just a piece of sandworm. And for whatever reason, striped bass will, when they won't hit anything else, they will hit the back end of that and that little piece of worm and
I don't
big
know.
fish too.
Yeah, very big fish. Yeah, maybe it just looks like a giant eel or worm to them, and I think maybe it's the twisting motion and it just going slowly right by them. It's maybe instinctual. But yeah, that if you're in the dog days of summer, trolling a tube can get them to bite. I know a lot of charter guys on the boats, they're trolling tubes. It's just kind of a foolproof method to catch stripers.
Now, do you have a dedicated setup for it? Like, do you use lead core line?
No, honestly, I keep it pretty simple. I just usually I'll just have a pre-tied leader, like 40-pound fluoro, connected to my braid, which is, I don't know, 20-pound braid, and a TA clip at the end of it, and I'll just clip on a tube. I'm usually fishing like 30, 40 feet of water and just, I don't know, 25 seconds a line and just slow troll. And once you start marking them, usually like the countdown begins, like, all right, it should be getting tight in 20 to 30 seconds. It's pretty, I mean, I don't want to call it easy. There's definitely, it's a learning curve because if you drop too much line, you're going to get snagged. If you're not deep enough, that's the thing with the tube. You want it low and slow. So you want it, in my opinion, as deep as possible and going as slow as possible, which is actually an advantage on the kayak because with a boat, you have to, throw buckets behind you to slow yourself down. On a kayak, you can really just creep along like a mile and a half an hour. And yeah, if you can get it down deep and really slow and you're going over fish, you'll probably catch one.
Tube and worm trolling from a boat, I've found, unless you're the captain, it's kind of boring because the rods are in the rod holders.
Yep.
The captain is the one who's paying attention, who's watching the fish finder, who's bumping in and out of gear because, like you said, trying to really hit that slow. So, like, for whoever's running the boat, they're kind of in tune and having fun. Everybody else is just waiting for a rod to go off.
Exactly.
In a kayak, though, for the most part, you're holding the rod, so you kind of feel what's going on, unless you're fishing multiple rods. And you're kind of like, you're in tune with the whole process, and you've got that feel for where the tube is. You're adjusting your speed, whether you're pedaling or just adjusting the speed on the trolling motor on your kayak, and you're able to kind of, I don't know, adjust more and feel like a little more active in the fishing.
It definitely makes trolling a little more fun because, like, one, you're basically water level, so you're immediately a little more like into it. And yeah, a lot of the time I'm holding the rod, so you feel the hit immediately. Or even if I have it in the back rod holder, just hearing it and feeling it, like your kayak will move when these fish hit it, and you'll get towed when you're fighting these fish. So it definitely makes it more exciting for sure.
That's that sensation. When I first really started to get into kayak fishing, I was living on a freshwater pond and had a smaller sit-inside kayak, and I would paddle around trolling crankbait out the back, and just the feeling of a fish hitting that troll lure, you feel it through the entire kayak into your seat, like. It feels like I don't know, it's a cool sensation. It's one of the things that got me really into kayak fishing.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely a unique experience, especially on the ocean too, because you add like a little bit of swell and some wind into that, and then you're fighting big fish. Gets your adrenaline going.
So we're up through the warm periods and how to target striped bass then. As you move into the fall season, how does your fishing change?
The fall is definitely more chasing blitzes. I go very albie crazy every fall. I love chasing albies, love chasing bonito. Although that's a big complaint I have this season. I did not catch a single albie in Rhode Island this year.
Rhode Island had a tough albie year in 2024.
I know many people that basically specifically wait to fish until the albies come. They prefer albies over striper fishing. They weren't finding any. They weren't catching any. It was tough. I had, I think, 2 trips where I saw them in Rhode Island. Couldn't make it happen on either trip. But on the flip side, bonito everywhere. And I think you guys experienced the same. Actually, we went fishing in your neck of the woods and saw some of the craziest bonito feeds I think I've seen ever. And that bite started, I think, in June. I was catching bonito, and it went almost through October.
Yeah.
Anywhere you went, if there was any kind of feed, there was probably bonito in it. It was
when did
crazy.
you catch your last one, Jimmy?
So I'd pretty much given up on albies and bonito fishing by mid-October, and then I forget, it was early November, and I went down to one of the better-known shore spots here on the south side of Falmouth, saw a bunch of guys fishing there. I'm like, oh, what are you guys catching? Schoolies? Like, no. I look in the bucket, the guy's got a bonito tail sticking out of it. So I went I was going lunches, I was going before work, and it took me, I lost a couple, but finally on November 9th, I caught a bonito, and that was my last one of the season.
Yeah, that's crazy, catching bonito almost into mid-November. Yeah, I wonder. I hear like kind of, fish rumors like, oh, if the bonito are heavy, the albies won't be there, or vice versa. I wonder if that came into play. But yeah, albie season was incredibly disappointing in Rhode Island.
You'd have to think there is some correlation.
There must be.
Because there were I've never seen a bonito year like this one.
I haven't either.
Or like last year. And I heard people say they ate all the bait or something, or that the albies stayed offshore because there was too much competition from the bonito. But the prevailing wisdom before that is like the bonito would come in, then the albies would kind of bully them out.
Yeah, so when we were catching bonito in June, I was like, oh man, we're in for a hell of an albie season. We're all getting excited. And then once October was rolling around and no one had caught any yet, we were like, oof, maybe they're not really. That's the thing, they're pelagic. So it's like, I feel like it's normal. They can just bypass bodies of water altogether. Like, it's not a guarantee that they're going to come in.
If they found good bait elsewhere, there's no reason for them to come in and feed in the shallow water here.
Exactly.
Everglades Boats is an industry leader in premium offshore fishing boats. Founded in 1997 by boating industry legend and former Boston Whaler executive Bob Doherty, Everglades revolutionized the boat building industry with the invention of the ram cap process for one-piece unsinkable hulls. Respected for its renowned hull ride, Everglades builds center console and hybrid boats from 25 to 45 feet that make a statement about the status and savvy of their owner. Everglades has received numerous industry awards and achieved an unparalleled reputation for superior safety, performance, and quality. For more information about Everglades Boats, stop by your local dealer or visit evergladesboats.com. Everglades Boats, built for beyond.
The only ones I caught were in Martha's Vineyard. We actually ferried our kayaks out there. We fished, they do a derby every fall. Me and my buddy fished that. Caught a few albies out there, so that was fun to actually catch some albies. But aside from that, yeah, this is my first time in Rhode Island not catching albies in quite a few seasons.
Was this your first time fishing the Martha's Vineyard Derby?
This is my second.
Second time?
That is a competitive tournament, man.
Yeah.
I weighed in, my first fish ever was a 10-pound albie, which I was happy with. I'm like, hey, double-digit albie. The dude in front of me had a 17-pound albie. I'm like, I just don't stand a chance. But that's a very, very fun tournament.
And what was that process like? So you're bringing your kayak, putting them on the car, and then bringing the car over on the ferry?
Yep. The ferry runs out of Woods Hole, I think. My buddy brought his truck and ferried our kayaks over. And, yeah, just a lot of driving around, launching from beaches. It's a lot of work, but it was fun.
How much traveling do you do with your kayak? I mean, you also came over to the south side of Cape Cod, like you mentioned, to do some albie fishing with me where we found bonito. What other trips have you taken with the kayak this past year?
This year, I actually went to New Jersey twice with my kayak. That was about 4.5-hour drive. I think that's the farthest I've gone so far. I went in the spring to catch early stripers in the Raritan Bay. With limited success, I caught fish. I've never fished in Jersey before, so just being able to launch in the Raritan and catch some, I was happy. They weren't the size I was hoping. They were mainly smaller fish. I think this was April 5th. I went down this past spring. The water was still pretty cold. I think it was still in the upper 40s. I feel like I went a little early. I also went down this fall for a very quick trip. Found the most bunker I think I've ever seen. Whales feeding on them. I had one chance where there were some stripers feeding on it, but for the most part, it was like bait everywhere, not a lot of fish. So that, unfortunately, I got skunked on that trip. But yeah, I'm trying to expand my traveling and kayak fishing a little more.
A little spooky being around the whales in a kayak?
They were thankfully further out, but yeah, my girlfriend wasn't happy when I told her that I was kayaking with whales feeding. And you see all these videos of whales breaching like on boats and stuff like that. It was in the back of my mind, but they're far enough away where I was comfortable. If one was anywhere near me, I probably would have gotten off the water immediately. I don't really mess with that.
Have you ever been out there and seen a whale while you're in the kayak?
I've never seen a whale from the kayak, no.
Well, I only did one time, and it was I was cod fishing with Eric Harrison out of Gloucester, and we were out, and it was between. I mean, my legs were shot by the time we got. I was like, I hope we're fishing here for a while. But the whale was between us and shore. I think it was a right whale, but that was in early April. You guys have done cod fishing.
Yep.
Kayaks.
I started doing that a few years ago, early April. Oh, that's the first ocean fish I caught last season. April 1st or 2nd was a cod. Took the autopilot out about a mile and a half into spot lock on some structure. It was not fun fishing. It was freezing, obviously. I mean, I picked a good day to where it was calm and windless and, dry suit on and all that. But I think it took me 2 hours to catch one, 13-inch cod. But I set out. I'm like, I want to catch a cod today, and I did it. So
Cod are a fish you don't equate with kayak fishing. So
no, not typically. So it was cool. Yeah, I think it was about 1.5 miles out. That was on the ocean, and I think I was using Asian crabs. I was bait fishing. Yeah, I did it, but
so check done. You're not rushing to get back out there this spring.
I'll probably do it this spring because once April rolls around, I'm so stir crazy. I'm like, I just got to get back out in the water.
So any other? So you mentioned you went to Jersey, you came up to Martha's Vineyard. Where else is on your radar for taking the kayak to?
Honestly, this time of year, I'm debating like down south, like the Carolinas or maybe even Florida. Kind of just like starting the initial planning of that. I did do some winter fishing last Florida in February. Just hired a charter out there, and even they're like, February isn't our best month. So I'm kind of just trying to figure out the logistics of it. But I would like to go down south with the kayak.
February is a month where you want it to be good. It's bad everywhere. Yeah. It doesn't. It's tough in the Keys. It's windy, and because there's nothing happening here, like, well, surely it must be good somewhere else. February sucks everywhere for fishing.
I was a little disappointed when the guy in Florida was like, honestly, not the best month for us. I'm like, damn, I was banking on this like every February to come down. So I might do that more so in March or something. But yeah, definitely down south somewhere.
One that's on my radar, and we just ran an article on this in our March issue, which will be coming out it's either out now or around the time this podcast comes out, is cobia in the Chesapeake.
Oh, that'd be really cool.
It's Kevin Hughes did this story for us, and he lives in Virginia, but he fishes there in the open water for them, and it sounds pretty wild. Sight fishing for them, and they're just a great kayak target, great target in general. I'm very high on cobia right now.
Yeah, I've never caught one, but I'm starting to see. Actually, someone caught one in Rhode Island this year from the shore, and like a good sized one. So when that happened, I'm like, oh, I might have to like start looking into cobia a little bit. That's definitely a fish on my bucket list.
Yeah, we've seen them caught from the beach 5 minutes from our office here on Cape Cod. It's kind of like the beach where the tackle shops send everybody, all the tourists, and say, if you want to catch fish, go on down to this beach, and then. Somebody said, "Hey, I was down at the beach fishing and caught this fish. What is it?" They got a cobia up on the sand. So
yeah, it just goes to show. Sometimes it's just like a random. Yeah, you just never know. And actually, I think a tarpon got caught this year in Sakana River, in my neck of the woods.
Yeah.
Like a big tarpon, and that kind of broke the internet for a little bit. So you're just like, you just never know. I think that's the appeal of fishing is you truly never know when you go out like what cool happen. So it's cool to see how the fishery is changing.
What are some of the coolest things you've seen out kayak fishing other than fish you've caught? Any wildlife or any interesting scenes you've come upon? Or?
Mainly like as far as wildlife, I've seen dolphins quite a bit in Newport. It seems like every year there's a pod that will roll through. I think they're bottlenose. I've seen them. I try and stay away from big mammals on the kayak. That's one thing. I would rather see sharks than big mammals, to be honest.
Yeah.
See a lot of seals. I don't like seals. I don't want them messing with my catch. Seen a few pilot whales in Rhode Island off of Narragansett, actually. At first, I thought it was a big dolphin, but it's just like a black whale, and I looked it up. I forget the name of it, but I just call them pilot whales. Seen a few sunfish cruise on by. Yes, that's pretty much it as far as wildlife goes. Just a lot of the big mammals. Not too many shark encounters. The only real shark encounter I had was pollock fishing on my friend's boat. Poor beagle came and took it right in front of me as I was about to grab the fish.
Yeah, I think we posted that video.
Yeah, I was filming for that, which was cool. We knew he was there because he was circling around. So apparently they'll do that if they know fish are. And I was with Cam Fair, who's a charter guy and commercial fisherman. He always finds the fish. So we were catching hundreds of pounds of pollock. We were commercial fishing. And once they see all those fish coming up, they'll actually hang out on your boat and wait for the right moment to strike. And yeah, I was about half a second from grabbing those fish. He came right under and took it. Thankfully, no shark encounters in the kayak.
So you haven't run into any brown sharks?
The closest I came, actually, is the day we were fishing for bonito when I was up in this neck of the woods.
Yeah.
I remember asking you when we launched, I'm like, is it sharky out here? And you're like, yeah.
Yeah, it is.
And I was like, okay. And they were just epic bonito feeds all day. And we bumped into one guy out there who actually pulled an albie out of all these bonito feeds.
Mm-hmm.
And he actually sent me a picture later on of his albie bit in half. And he was like, dude, brown shark took this. And we were fishing right with him. So I'm like, yeah, I'm glad I was off the water for that instance. But as far as Rhode Island, I've seen a hammerhead. My buddy sent me a video of a hammerhead circling around him like a juvenile one. But me personally, I haven't seen too many, which I'm fine with. Big mammals and sharks, I'm okay with not seeing on the kayak.
I'm with you there. It was definitely the trips I took chasing albies and bonito from the kayak this year off the south side of the Cape. There were more sharks around, more sharks taking fish, which I don't know if I'd really heard of that happening too often with albie fishermen, but having them bite the albie, take off the tail end real close to the kayak. I had was off of Nobska Point, which is kind of a well-known place to fish here. There's always a lot of boats and kayaks, and there was a guy in a boat who kind of yelled out to a bunch of us kayak fishermen. He's like, "Hey guys, be careful! We just saw a really big brown shark circling around here." Oof. So
yeah, you guys definitely seem to get them more in this neck of the woods.
They seem to skip Rhode Island. Like I know guys in Eastern Connecticut, like Josh Rayner, who does one of our columns, big kayak fisherman there. He's constantly dealing with sharks and stripers out of Eastern Connecticut where he fishes. We're seeing them in the surf here, and they're kind of a pain. I like catching them. I like catching them from the beach. I used to catch them from the kayak, but off Jersey, but they were smaller ones.
Yeah,
like they tend to be a little bit bigger up here. I haven't. Kevin talked about it a little bit. You were looking to target some brown sharks from the kayak this year. You want to do that this year?
Not from the kayak, from the shore, all day. I actually caught a juvenile sand tiger shark one time from the shore. I was chunking, and it was about the size of like an average dogfish. And those things have like the craziest teeth I've ever seen, those sand tigers. And I was about to, I was like, that's a really brown dogfish. I'm like, that's a weird looking dogfish. And I was about to grab it, and he turned over, and they just have the gnarliest teeth. I was like, oh, nope, that's a shark. So that was, that's the only shark I think I've actually ever caught. I usually don't target them, and that was just bycatch.
You like to chunk fish from the beach?
I love it. That's honestly one of my favorite ways to catch stripers is chunk and bunker. And it's kind of, it's not like a lost art, but not as many people do it. I feel like lure fishing is, I like to lure fish too, but that seems like there's so many guys that are like plugs or nothing, like chunking, like, nah, I don't do that. But I really enjoy it. It's a fun way to target them. And I usually get my biggest fish to the shore every year from chunking. It really does produce good results.
It takes more effort to fish chunks from shore. Like people, if you were just looking at it, well, like, oh, bait's the easy, but it's not. You've got to get the fresh bait. You've got to lug all the extra stuff out there into it. I love fishing chunks. I am terrible at it. I go through this whole routine every year in like late May and early. I'm like, I'm going to go catch a 60-pounder on a chunk, and I'm getting the bait. It's a whole. I'm telling Kevin to bring back bunkery snags in the kayak, and usually it just ends up being like, it turns into a maggot farm in my truck.
Yeah, you got to be really careful with the bait. Shout out Sam's Bait and Tackle in Middletown. They always have really fresh bunker. And during like the summer when I'm chunking, I'm usually in there every day. So they're like, go in the back, get your bunker. And I'll just like scooping them into a bucket. It's not as simple as just like casting it and sitting around for 3 hours. I'll usually, every 20 minutes, I'm checking my bait. Especially, you'll get a lot of different fish. Like, I mean, everything, each bunker you'll get. I think I've caught literally every species you can think of inshore chunking bunker. So it's a lot of bycatch. There's days where the current's really messing with you. You get a lot of seaweed. You get snagged a lot. That's a big one. It takes some work. But at the end of the day, it's just, especially at night and in the summertime when those big bass are lazy, it's easier and more effective, in my opinion, to sink down a bloody piece of bait right on them in deep water, and eventually one will come and take it.
So could you walk us through your rig? Like what hook are you using? How long's your leader?
Yeah, I usually with everything, kayak gear, shore fishing gear, I try and keep it as simple as possible. So I'll usually use 50-pound braid. I like going heavier with my tackle when I'm chunking, mainly for rocks. When these big fish get hooked, I've lost a bunch having them rub up on rocks. So I'll use about 50-pound braid. I'll jump it up to an 80-pound fluoro. And again, that's not because I think my knot is going to fail. That's more for abrasion with rocks. So it's just 50-pound braid, barrel swivel, 80-pound fluoro leader, maybe a foot or two, like not crazy long. Now we got to use circle hooks, usually a 8/0 circle hook I think I'll use. And
have you landed on a brand or style that you like for the circles?
I think it's the Gamakatsus. That's a pretty popular one. I'm not really married to brands for most gear, so I think I'm using the Gamakatsu hooks for the most part. And oh yeah, above the swivel I have a weight slide, usually 3-ounce weight. It's pretty simple. And yeah, it works really well.
And what type of areas do you look for your summertime chunking?
Deep water. I look for depth more than structure in the summertime. Just because I really believe, especially from the shore, if those fish and that water's warm, they're in deep holes. And yeah, it's you got to know when to set the hook. Like, not every hit is the right time to set the hook. And now with the circle hook, you don't really want to set it like a J hook. Good rule of thumb is I'll wait till my rod tip is like really starting to bend down. Then I just give one real crank, and that usually buttons them up. But it's tough. You'll get like these little taps, and you're like, oh, is that a striper? I don't know. And then out of nowhere, it just shoots down. So there's little like nuances to it. But I really enjoy doing it. I've always found bait fishing appealing, even as a little kid. I think like it came from putting a worm on a hook and a bobber, and just seeing that bobber go down is like the most exciting thing. And I think it just translated into striper fishing for me.
It's the idea with a chunk too. It's like, sure, it could be a 10-pound fish that eats it, but any size bass is going to eat it. If 50-pound fish comes and sees that fresh chunk there, like, he's going to eat it.
Oh, 100%.
And that's what always keeps me so engaged.
You just
chunk
never
fishing. Like,
know.
Any bite, like, oh, there it is.
Yep.
Is this going to be the big one? Now, do you fish multiple rods, or just one rod and hold it, one rod and a spike? Though it might not feel like it yet, the saltwater season is coming up fast, which means it's time to reserve your spot at the rail on one of the boats in the Helen H fleet. The trips begin in early April aboard the Starfish, fishing the winter flounder grounds in Cape Cod Bay. By June, the Helen H will be running past Nantucket to the best fluke fishing grounds in the Northeast. If catching a doormat fluke is on your bucket list, these trips offer your best shot at catching a double-digit flatfish. I caught my first 10-pound fluke aboard the Helen H a couple years ago, and that fish wasn't even in the top 3 when it came to deciding who won the pool money. New for 2025, fishermen can enjoy more space at the rail aboard the Angler, which is running 10-hour, open boat, ultra-limited trips to Nantucket Shoals. And if you want to fish the canyons, my favorite way to get there has always been aboard a headboat. The Helen H begins running offshore in late summer with 2- and 3-day trips targeting tuna, mahi, and swordfish. A couple years back, I watched Cheech lose his first ever swordfish right at the boat aboard the Helen H, and we'll be back out there this fall looking for redemption. There's plenty of great fishing options with the Helen H fleet this season, but the boats book up fast, so be sure to reserve your trip today at helen-h.com.
So I'll usually bring 2 rods, one actually for lures. So it depends how intent. If I know it's probably going to be a good chunk bite, I'm only going to be chunk fishing. And just one rod, I say to hold it, but there are times I get lazy and put it in a rod holder. But it's definitely easier to set the hook if you're holding it. On slow days, I'm like, whatever, I'll throw it in the rod holder. And also on slow days, I'll usually bring a second rod just in case, like if I'm fishing sunset, a blitz breaks out or something like that for lures. And if I get bored chunking too, I'll just start throwing some plugs. But yeah, usually just a chunk rod and a lure rod.
So what's the best fish you've had on a chunk so far?
I think my best from the shore is a 47-inch striper on the chunk. I haven't cracked 50. That's a big goal of mine. Yeah, that was, I think, 3 years ago. And that was July at like 7 p.m. when it was still bright out. I've had a lot of success on the sunset window. Mm-hmm. Sometimes to the point where I'm like, why am I going at midnight if I'm catching fish at sunset better? And I'm not sure why. That time bite in the summer with a chunk seems to work well for me.
So my best chunk fish last year was 50 inches. It was a smooth dogfish.
It was a 50-inch smooth dogfish.
It was enormous. And I was in a lineup of guys. Everyone's throwing plugs, but I'm like, I'm going to outsmart all you dum-dums. I've got my fresh chunks, so I'm casting them out and letting them sweep down with the current. I caught 2 enormous dogfish, but the biggest one was the first one. I was wrestling with this thing forever because I was waist deep.
Yeah.
It's wrapping its tail around my leg. Like, it was like I was wrestling a gator. And at one point, I wish I'd thought of this at the time. Like, I just let it go. But I wish I'd had because it's pitch black. I should have walked over a guy like, I just got my personal best. Can you get a picture for me? And then wait to see his reaction when the flash hits. It's a big dogfish. Yeah. So
yeah,
that was that's most of my chunking is for smooth dogs, unfortunately.
Yeah, I feel like every summer you tell me like this year I'm going to really focus on chunking and get some big bass doing it. It'll happen.
Yeah, that's what we all say. Yeah, that is when I'll chunk in the spring too in the bays. I'll usually do chunking springtime is in the bays. Summertime, oceanfront deep. In the bay, you'll get that really good window where it's just stripers, and you have really, really good nights. Me and my buddy Tyler Prevedini, shout out to him, very good fisherman. We have a few good spots in the bays. We've had many nights chunking where it's like multiple 40-plus inch fish coming up, and a lot of overslot fish. Obviously, that's not every trip, but we've had multiple good nights. And then once mid-June, late June, July rolls around, dogfish, 3 dogfish for every striper. And that's like, okay, the bay bite's done. The water's too hot. But yeah, those dogfish, they're pretty much straight muscle. I can't even, I don't think I've ever seen a 15-inch dogfish. That must have been not fun to
I mean, I didn't measure
wrestle.
it, but it was pretty darn big.
Their tails are super long too. Yeah, dogfish are not my favorite.
Yeah, no one's gonna. We'll give you 50 inches on the
Yeah,
dogfish. We
thank
don't
you,
need
yeah.
proof. We mentioned earlier you were talking about the shark that attacked your was it pollock at the side of the boat,
Yep.
and that you had the cameras rolling. You were collecting some video. You're a bit of a fishing influencer. Fishing with Johnny is your handle across TikTok, YouTube, and I think Instagram as well. If anybody wants to look for you. What I could tell you're about to say I'm not an influencer.
Yeah, I kind of consider myself like fisherman first, like filming second, if that is. I don't know. The word influencer obviously is so
I could see you
thrown
cringe.
around now. It's like, oh, it's not like that. Yeah, I started doing that.
You prefer TikToker?
Yeah, actually, yes. I on my resume I have TikToker. Yeah, I started doing that. I think 6 or 7 years ago now. Mainly, kind of just on a whim, because I used to watch like Elias Fishing and Fishaholic, those big guys, and really enjoyed the videos. I'm like, I'll just throw a GoPro on and see what happens, and then just kind of took it and ran with it, and then it's grown to a decent size, and it is fun looking back at the footage and seeing, like, because you see a blitz and it's over, and you're like, oh, that was awesome, but then if you go back and watch it, you're like, oh, you can put it in slow-mo, you can see other things that you might not have picked up, so it is actually pretty fun filming.
And your content, for the most part, I enjoy it. I enjoy it because, for the most part, you're not trying to set out with saying, I'm going to go and create something. You're just documenting the fishing or the activity that you're already doing.
Yeah, I try and just focus on what I would be doing if I wasn't filming, just going out and fishing. And I'll do little side projects. Like, the internet is so weird. Some videos that have done very well is me flipping rocks for Asian crabs, and they'll get one got 15 million views, and it just goes to show you, like, you never know what people want to see on the internet. And people thought it was the most groundbreaking thing that I was flipping over rocks and a bunch of Asian crabs are scurrying away.
What was the comment section like? Was it all like, didn't know I could do this, or did it get ugly in the comments?
It was mainly just a lot of why are you doing this, and that's so crazy seeing that many. I think it was more of the shock of, because not everyone lives on the coast, so I think it was a lot of people just genuinely didn't know. And it's funny because we've known this since we were kids. You can flip a rock at the shoreline and 15 crabs will come scurrying out. And I think it was maybe a lot of landlocked people that were like, whoa, what is that? And the main comment was, this is so satisfying. I don't know why. It was just one of those weird, satisfying videos that kind of spun off into its own series. So
it was one of those videos that I know when I watched it, I'm like, why am I still watching this? But it's from your point of view, and it's like, I want to see what's under the next rock.
Yeah,
he's going to flip another rock,
I think that's a
and
big
I want to
part
see.
of it too.
And then you'd flip a rock, you're like, oh, I think this is going to be a good one. You flip it over and like, oh my God, there's all these crabs. They're scurrying.
Yeah.
See your hands try to grab them. I'm like, oh, that's a good one. Like, 2 minutes later, I'm still watching.
Yeah.
I'm rooting for you to get more crabs.
It brings
what am
out
I doing?
the inner kid in us, I think. So I'll kind of do side project like that and take it and run with it. But for the most part, just trying to film good fishing,
You've gotten some incredible blitz footage, man.
That used to be my bread and butter for a while. I'm like, I don't care what's the size of the fish. This was a few years back. I was blitz crazy, I would call it. I don't care if they're just schoolies. I'm just trying to find the biggest blitzes and the best footage. And it did lead to me. It was a lot of driving around. A lot of days where I'm not even throwing cat. This is in the fall. I'd wait for the fall run to start. A lot of driving around. A lot of days where I'm not even casting. If I wasn't, it was almost bad because if I didn't see a blitz, I'm like, oh, there's no fish here, and drive away, which is totally not the case half the time. But it did lead to some pretty cool footage of feeds pretty much at my feet. So it goes to show you in the fall, if you just go to a bunch of different spots, you'll probably find activity somewhere. So yeah, blitzes. I mean, I still love blitzes, but that was my bread and butter for a while.
And you get some really cool blitzes there where the fish kind of, I've heard them called bass rafts, where
Yes.
it's like they're crawling on top of each other practically.
Yeah, I actually didn't know that term until I posted it. It was this is in Narragansett in August, actually, believe it or not. They were feeding with their mouths open. Oh, they almost looked like carp. There was like, I don't know, 50 to 100 of them all in a tight school, and you could just see their mouths wide open, like sticking out of the water like carp. And I got super close. I was the only one there, so I basically drove through the blitz in my kayak, which you're not really supposed to do, and just got a really good shot on my phone and GoPro. And I posted it. I was like, this is a really interesting feed. And people were like, oh, that's called rafting. And I think the theory is the bait is so small, like tiny baby, like, you know when crabs hatch and they're just like they're microscopic almost, something like that. And they're just literally driving through it with their mouths open. And those are some of the pickiest feeds I've ever seen. They're so tight you can snag them. Like I've cast lures into them and actually snagged one on the back. And I'm like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be like casting into this direct biomass. But that is not good fishing, good footage type feeds.
Another piece of footage that's done really well for you on social media is lobstering from the kayak, which I find fascinating. Tell me a little bit about like how do you go about catching recreational lobsters from a kayak?
So I have to thank my buddy Carl for that. He's just part of the kayak fishing community. He was doing it for years on his pro angler, and I always thought it was the coolest thing. I'm like, he's like, oh, I got 30 lobsters this season, 50 lobsters this season. And I always told myself, I'm like, oh, I'm going to do it. Never invested in the gear for years. And then I told my girlfriend Danielle about it, and she's like, wait, you can get fresh lobsters? She's like, buy the pots right now. And I was like, all right. And I had the autopilot, which is a very sturdy kayak. It's basically like a mini boat. And yeah, in Rhode Island, it's $40 for a recreational license. You can have 5 pots. And just kind of started eyeballing it. It's kind of like setting traps, I feel like, for hunting. You look at the maps and you're like, there's probably lobsters down there, and just throw out pots, let them soak for the early season's better because the water's colder. You don't get that nasty seaweed on it, and the bait actually doesn't rot out. So you can let them soak for a week and the bait will still be good. This is like April. Midsummer, you got to check them like every 3 days, or you're going to have skeletons in your bait bag. And I've actually had lobsters like hollowed out in my pots before. That's a cool little side thing I like doing. It does turn into a chore a little bit, though. After 5 pots of 50 feet on the kayak once every 3 days, there's days where I'm fishing, I'm like, oh, it's 85 degrees. I got to go check my pots. But it is actually really exciting. Seeing a pot, I think the most I've ever had in one pot is 5 lobsters. 4 were keepers. Wow. So I get like audibly excited when that comes. I'm like, oh yeah, it is really fun. Yeah.
I would do that. We should do that.
It's worth it.
You should do that. And
You just gotta find spots where you're out of people's way. Obviously, don't go anywhere near the commercial guys go. Weather is a big factor too. I actually lost 3 pots this year, which was a bummer. I think I had them too deep, and we got a couple big storms, and I went out to check them, gone.
We're out there collecting somebody's striper plugs
Yeah,
right now.
Yeah, I've actually brought up, because guys will like jig next to pots because there's bait, so sometimes like fluke will go next. I've brought up so many lures on that thing. I gotta check the line to make sure there's not a hook sticking out of it. But yeah, lobstering from the kayak, very fun. Highly recommend it.
I crabbed from my kayak once and it had immediate regrets with a blue crab, like right near some, your most tender bits. And, carrying around the kayak. So I didn't do that again after that time. But lobstering seems a little bit more manageable. Well, more work, but
yeah, there's recreational pots you can buy, which are a lot smaller, and it's totally doable from the kayak. Yeah, I've never done crabbing before. That's one I want to try this year.
I don't recommend it. Do it for sure. Rhode Island just opened up. You can crab at night now, right?
I was not aware of that. That's interesting.
I could. Let's not quote Jim on that yet, but I thought that you can crab at night in Massachusetts. You couldn't in Rhode Island, but I thought maybe they opened that up.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the crab
may edit
laws.
this all out if I'm wrong.
But Jimmy is very, very big on blue crabbing, especially in the summertime. I'd say it's the one you tend to mix it in with a night of surf casting, but it is, I would say, the one thing that is equal in your passion to surf casting is now your passion for putting together a mess of blue crabs.
Pam hates it because not only my wife Pam, it's like eating them is such an event. It's like a 2-hour where like just I'm going to be on the deck creating a massive crab
Yeah,
shells, and
to
I'm not going to
get-
help with the kids at all or anything. So
Yeah, I feel like the meat to effort ratio it's a lot of work. I've heard to get that squared away. That's the beauty of the lobsters. Just throw them in a pot, you're good to go. So yeah, I would think I got 28 keepers this year was my total for lobsters.
that's really good.
Yeah, I was pretty happy. I was actually shooting for 50. I was really ambitious, but I was very happy with 28. Lost some gear though, but that's part of it.
And I've heard that the lobster population in Long Island Sound on the south parts of Long Island has declined or gotten tougher with shell rot. Is that something that you've seen?
I've seen a lot with shell rot. Yeah, it's almost like I didn't know what it was at first. I had to ask my buddy Carl. They look rusty almost, and their shell their shell is soft to the touch, and you can like squeeze it. They just look gnarly, and I thought it was disease at first, and I was like, Carl, what is this? He goes, oh, it's shell rot, and I'm not sure like why exactly it happens. It could be water quality, or it could be they haven't molted in a while. If they don't molt for a while, that happens apparently. I actually ate one with shell rot because I asked Carl, I'm like, are these safe? And apparently the commercial guys, if they get one with shell rot, they'll pre-cook it because the meat is totally fine. It's unaffected. But if you go to a tank and you see one with shell rot,
Yeah, you're
like,
you're not picking
they
that
look
one out at Red Lobster.
gnarly. Yeah, if you just Google like shell rot lobster, if that comes to your plate, you're gonna be like, what is that? I would say 1 out of every 5 had shell rot
Yeah.
that I noticed this year, which is kind of a lot. I'm not sure why, but yeah, it's gnarly. I've had them come up missing claws, and they have like one little tiny baby claw growing back. A couple females loaded with eggs, which you gotta notch and throw back. A couple of stone crabs. I'm waiting for the day that I'll get like a blue. I want like a rare lobster in there, that would be really cool. But yeah, you never know what's gonna come up. It just adds to the. I like doing a lot of different things out there, so it kind of fishing stinks. Go check my pots. Gives you another thing to do.
It's pretty cool. I mean, you talked about seeing dolphins, seeing pilot whale, all the different species you've caught, the lobstering you're doing there. It's pretty cool for Narragansett Bay, which is in some ways, I mean, you're in New England in the Northeast, highly populated area. You've got Providence is right on there. You've got Fall River, Mount Hope Bay, where for a long time you had a giant power plant.
Yeah.
So like there's a lot of, there's been a lot of industry, a lot of history to Narragansett Bay, but overall right now, I mean, it's a pretty incredible ecosystem. You're showing like all of the things you can do in there from a kayak and from shore. It's good to see that it's healthy and can support that kind of an ecosystem.
Yeah, it's really great. And again, I'm just very lucky it's in my backyard. I didn't kind of realize how unique it was until I started traveling and fishing a little more. Just the fishing alone. I just feel like from April through mid-November, like the season is usually pretty consistent and pretty good. Usually get really good albie fishing. The striper fishing is usually good year-round. Phenomenal tautog fishing. We haven't even really talked about that much, but the tautog fishing is fantastic. Yeah, it's a great place to live and fish for sure.
Have you gotten a real big tog out of the kayak?
I haven't. That's where I'm lacking in my fishing resume. I have not cracked double digits. It's a big goal of mine.
I'm right there with you.
Yeah,
man.
it's tough. It's I've gotten a few like 8 pushing 9 pounders, and like even those dig.
That's
man.
from a kayak?
Yeah,
That's
from
incredible.
a kayak. Yeah, and like those come up, and I'm like, you hear guys catching. The state record came up this year of 20 something pounds. It's like I can't even imagine. It's like hooking a cinder block. But yeah, all keeper wise, you can limit out in the fall easily anytime you go out. I feel like, but I gotta focus on bigger tog this year. I'm gonna try using full crabs more. I've noticed that kind of weeds out the smaller ones. But yeah, that's a big goal of mine this fall. Big tog.
Did you do any togging from the kayak this year?
I don't think I did any from the kayak. I went 2 years ago. I went out to Connecticut with Matt Stone and done some locally. I love tog fishing. It is one type of fishing that I prefer to be in a boat, just with the mess of crabs and cutting crabs and doing all that. It is super fun from a kayak, but if I've got a chance to be in a boat with spot lock and room to spread out, and
it's nice being able to stand and just like vertical fish. It's definitely my back that I start feeling it the most when I'm tog fishing, because I'll like hunch forward a little bit in anticipation. Like 2 hours in, I'm like, oh my god, I need to take a break, dude.
Our go-to kayak tog spot too is known by everybody. So everybody with a small boat or a kayak also fishes it. The one we have.
Yeah.
There's others. But if you're not the first guy there in April, like, enjoy catching your 13-inch tide all day.
Yeah, that's tough. And that's why I like the autopilot a lot, because that allows me, I'll go out like up to 2 miles and spot lock on a wreck out. So I'm basically fishing with other boats instead of like the local kind of kayak pool. So that kind of opens more water and a little more flexibility and get away from the crowds a little bit. So the spot lock, if I'm tog fishing, 90% of the time I'm in the autopilot. That spot lock is just a cheat code for them.
Yeah, to be able to just stay in one place and then not have to pull up an anchor when you decide you want to move is the best.
Yeah, I've never anchored on a kayak before. It's always like sketched me out a little bit. Have you guys ever tried anchoring?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
I
boy.
watched Kevin anchor triumphantly once. I don't mean to embarrass you.
No, I'm not embarrassed at all. It was one of the we did. It might be more than 10 years ago. It was the days before you could have a spot locking trolling motor on your kayak. So we were in pedal kayaks, and
We went across. We launched from Woods Hole, went across Woods Hole, and then down the Elizabeth Islands.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
and it had been a pretty long day. And towards the end of the day, I wasn't thinking. The current along the Elizabeth Islands is pretty strong, and so I was trying to get the anchor set, and you move up current, and try and set the anchor and drift back, so you're over a rock pile. And I wasn't thinking because it had been a long day, and I set the anchor on the down current side of my kayak. And so I dropped the anchor down and started drifting with the current. And then, like, as the anchor came tight, all of a sudden in my mind, I realized what I had done in a split second. And so down current side, anchor pulls tight, and it just flipped the kayak, like, with such force.
It looked
You
like
completely upended?
It completely, because I had the anchor cleated off right next to me, right on my left side. So if you imagine the kayak drifting down in the current fast, that
and
coming tight,
snapping tight.
it was like somebody took the left side of the kayak and just yanked it underwater.
Oh, man.
watching it looked like like an invisible person body slammed Kevin against the water. The kayak flipped around so quickly that his rod didn't even come out of the holder. Like,
Wow,
Yeah,
that
I
is
didn't-
really
I
fortunate.
didn't lose any gear because it totally
just-
came all the way
just
around.
barrel rolled.
Wow.
Barrel rolled, and like everything was still there.
Yeah, I've heard a few horrors. That's one of the more intense stories I've heard of anchoring. But yeah, I hear a few like sketchy encounters where people just have to like cut it really quick. And so I was like, before the autopilot really came out, I'm like, I'm not going to anchor. It'll be okay. But yeah, that autopilot is game changer.
you can tell a story about me going in if you want. Like, there's been a couple.
Oh, there's a few of them that come to mind. I think probably my favorite one was you pedaling full speed toward an Albie blitz, and at the last minute, you're going full speed, and then you stop to go and make your cast, and I think your rudder turned or something.
I like Tokyo drifted into the blitz.
It went sideways, and then your kayak rolled, and you went out of the kayak as you made a cast.
Oh, man.
I finished my retrieve. I didn't hook up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, kayaks today, especially the bigger kayaks, like you mentioned, the Old Town, the autopilot, I fish from a big water. Like, you really have to do something stupid to end up in the water.
Yeah, they're very stable. I mean, I stand up on them and cast. Yeah, they're next level. I actually did have my first flip this season though. I was from a beach launch. I was trying to launch though. I wasn't like out there. But they were probably like close. I was in Charlestown, which always has breakers on the shore, and I was with my buddy Kevin, and he told me, he's like, you probably want some hip waders or a dry suit or something. Like, you gotta like bring it out past the waves and then jump in. I'm like, no, I can do it. Tried to like paddle head on into these waves, completely flipped. Lost 2 fish finder batteries, a rod and reel setup. Pride was very damaged too. I was soaking wet, and yeah.
I used
great.
to flip a lot doing the surf launches like that down in New Jersey, and to the point where I would just do what your buddy said. Like, I would wade out to chest deep and then pull myself.
That's
on
pretty
top.
much what you need to do. And that was I actually did a beach launch in Jersey after I flipped like that, and that was really in the back of my mind. But that was further in the season where I'm like, I can put the dry suit on and not sweat like crazy. So I did the right thing. But that one I just was stubborn. I'm like, no, I don't want to wear hip waders or anything. And yeah, went into the drink on that one.
Yeah, I said stupid, but really it is. Anytime you flip, you look back and you're like, that was avoidable.
Yep.
I didn't need to do that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Quantum is back and saltier than ever with the new Benchmark and Strive saltwater spinning reels. Last season, I used the Benchmark in the surf from Cape Cod to New Jersey, catching bass and blues on my 6000 model and albies and fluke on my 2500 model. The seal lock protection and IPX6 water resistance rating kept the reel performing flawlessly through every splash, spray, and accidental dunking. The best-in-class carbon fiber drag stayed smooth and put the boots to the fish. I cannot wait to break these reels back out when the stripers return in the spring. Also available is the new Quantum Myth High Modulus Carbon Fiber Rods. Built with Sea Guide corrosion-resistant guides for friction-free line flow and premium cork handles, these inshore rods pair perfectly with the Benchmark and Strive reels. To learn more about Quantum's triumphant return to the saltwater scene, visit quantum.com. Quantum, tested beyond limits.
Do you do a lot of fluking in the kayak, or?
I'm trying to do more. That's another thing on my fishing resume is kind of lacking. If I'm fluking, I'll usually just do like a high-low bucktail and just jig on some drifts. Trying to get more into it this next season. I think I broke my personal best this last season. I got a 24-inch fluke, which for me is very good. I rarely crack 20 inches with fluke. I actually have a video of that. I had it on my bump board trying to measure it, and it flopped off one right in the water. I was just like, yeah, I probably deserve that. Didn't have any lip grippers on them or anything. That's a fun fish, but I usually go striper crazy, and I don't target them as much, but I definitely want to change that this year.
Yeah, when the tog fishing's good, they don't have as much competition from stripers, but fluke is squarely in the middle of like the best striper fishing. So I understand that. I love fluke fishing, but I mean, it's tough to.
There's definitely some nuance to it too. Like their strikes aren't like always super detectable. You gotta net them. You gotta fight them nice and easy. Like there's a lot of ways to lose a fluke. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely it's not like tog where you just set the hook as hard as you can and rip them up. So that's definitely something I want to do more of next season. I try and do something new every season to kind of shake it up a little bit and not just like I'll get in patterns where it's like if I troll tubes for stripers for 3 days, even if I'm killing it, I'll be like, all right, I got to change it up. Like, let's use lures or let's go for, bottom fish or.
I mean, you live in the perfect place to mix things up
Exactly.
every
That's
season.
the beauty
Narragansett
of
Bay.
Narragansett Bay is you can really you can fish for a lot of species in a lot of different ways. So I try and keep it fresh.
If this coming season you have any openings on your chunking schedule for somebody to tag along?
You are more than welcome. Whenever you want to come down and chunk, we'll get a good session in for sure.
I think Jimmy's sitting over there thinking, I got to get in on this chunking. I'm thinking I want to come back up for that bluefish fishing, and this time I want to come on a day when they're just chewing everything.
Yeah, we need to get on a good bluefish day because most of those bluefish will push like 30 inches too in there. Like they're not snapper blues. They're big. I've seen like 36-inch bluefish come out of there. Like they're big, angry blues in there. Definitely need redemption on that. Maybe some striper tubing too. Get like some big cows on the tube or flutter spoon. And there's a lot of different things.
Yeah, definitely an awesome fishery that you're able to fish on there in Rhode Island. Something I want to do more of, and and you're gonna have a little competition now at your chunking spots too. Once you take Jimmy up there,
Jimmy's more than welcome.
I'll wait till the dogfish move in. That's kind of my special.
Anytime he wants to come.
Thank you so much for coming in. Really fun talking to you.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for having me.